Continuing our reading in The World and Thorinn by Damon Knight. Today is Chapter 1, Section 3. Do you want to break your neck, Flea? Withinga asked, taking a stride forward. When Snorri calls, man must answer, said Thorinn. He hopped back, expecting a blow, but Withinga only stared at him for a moment and then said, So it is, come. The old man has a task for you. Thorinn followed him around the moss-grown sods of the house. Under the weight of the roof, the sod walls had bulged year by year until the house had lost all its squareness and was shaped like a cheese. Beyond in the dooryard, Untha and old Gorat squatted at the well curb beside the empty leather horse trough. They looked up as Withinga and Thorinn approached. Untha, who had been scratching the bare earth idly with his dagger, gaped witlessly, showing tusks as long as Thorinn's thumb. His yellow eyes, slitted like a goat's, stared at Thorinn as if he were a stranger. Without speaking, Withinga sank down beside the other two. Squatting in a row, the three stared at Thorinn. Their massive, yellow-maned heads were on a level with his. Beyond them, the split sky arched over the rim of Hovenskar. At last Goriot spoke. The well is broken. Did you call me down here to tell me that? Asked Thorinn in honest surprise. Hold your tongue and listen, said Gorat. It is in my mind that the well may be mended. Therefore, jump into it and see. Thorinn hopped to the well curb and looked down. The deep shaft receded into darkness past the leather thong and the dim, round shape of the bucket. He could not see the bottom. How shall we mend it? He asked. With stones, grunted Withinga. The fool asked, wise men, it must answer. Go down, Flea. Thorinn bent forward toward the dark recessing shaft, from which a faint, cool breath arose. Then a new thought struck him. What if this should be long in the doing? He said, Who will cook the dinner? The two brothers glanced at each other again, and Withinga stroked his chin with a taloned gray hand. Well asked, he said grudgingly. And also, who will fetch peat for the fire and tend the horses? And milk the mares, suppose they turn fresh again, and make cheese, put in Untha, scowling and toying with his dagger. That is no work for a man. Thorinn stared from one to another, for their words made little sense, but Goriat said, Peace, and gave them a hard look under his frosty brows. Witlings have I for sons. The thing is decided. In his hands was a little framework of yellow ivory carved with runes, a magical implement which Thorinn had seen only twice before. Go down. Thorinn hesitated, but he felt the pressure as if an invisible hand had been laid along his back, and he realized that the old man had put a spell on him, a guise. Go down he must. He bent and picked up the bucket thong. He tugged at the end of it, where it was knotted around one of the stones of the curb, found it secure, and backed over the rim of the well mound, lowering himself hand under hand. The three white and yellow-maned heads turned to watch him. They disappeared over the rim of the well, but a moment later, as he descended, they came back into view, peering down. The three silhouetted figures seemed to rise and become foreshortened. The horizon sank. The ground bulged upward like water closing over his head. Clods and an occasional pebble, scraped loose by his feet, rebounded below. After a moment or two, he heard something strike the bottom. Cold air breathed up past him. The edge of the leather bucket touched his thighs. Holding the thong with one hand, he pulled the bucket up free of his legs, hung a moment, and dropped. The bottom drifted nearer. Dimly he saw it, bent his knees, took the shock. But the bottom of the well was tipped beyond his expectation, and it threw him against the side, making his head ring. He straightened himself and breathed deep. How cold it was down here, and no wonder, for the water they got from the well before it went dry had been cold as ice. That was natural, for the deeper you went, the further from the warmth-giving sky. Thus, it was colder here on the floor of the ancient ocean than it was in the highlands, colder again at the bottom of the well, and if you could dig deeper still into the earth, eventually you would come to the land of eternal ice, the underworld, where Snorri ruled. Go down! Thorinn crouched and felt for the source of the steady, slow current that breathed up around his legs. Oddly, although the air was cool, it seemed warmer than the earth and stones around him. His hands found an opening, half choked with mud. So far as he could tell, the rock table under the well had broken, and he was now crouching on a tilted slab of it that had fallen and stuck. He heard a sound, twisted to look up. The mouth of the well was a disk of brightness surrounded by concentric half circles of gray reflected light. The sound was repeated, and Thorinn saw a tiny black dot rise to the well mouth, bob and disappear. For a moment, he could not believe it. Then he stood up hastily and shouted, "Hi! Don't pull the bucket up! How am I to get up again?" A maned head appeared in silhouette against the sky and looked down at him silently. It vanished. Another appeared at a different place. Then it too was gone. "Ho!" shouted Thorinn, hearing his voice boom up the shaft. He listened. Over the slow sighing of the wind, a sound so familiar in Hovenscar that it was heard only when it changed, he caught the grumbling voice of Gorat. Lift your end." Footsteps scraped on the pebbles beside the well curb. Then something dark came into view and hung suspended in the middle of the disc. The broken circle of brightness around it flickered and vanished. The light on the walls turned gray and went out. The stony clang echoed down. The black air pressed close to Thorinn's eyes and seemed as heavy to breathe as water. There was a long pause and then another clang. Thorinn's heart was leaping, but he reached for his wallet calmly enough, found the wooden light box, and uncovered the window of mica at the end. The pale witch fire of the sky stuff inside brought his arms back in ghostly dimness and a vague circle of the dirt wall, but though he shielded it with his hands, it would not reach the top of the shaft. He waited, saying to himself, it was a joke. But in his belly he knew better. Not for any prank would glum Gorat or his lazy sons have lifted those two great stones, the broken slabs left over from the roofing, which had lain half sunken in the earth beside the house for as long as Thorinn could remember, and laid them on top of one another across the mouth of the well. He listened. Dimly from above, vibrating through the slabs of stone, came the deep rising and falling tones of Gorat's voice. Though he could not make out the words, the rhythm was familiar. What was it? Then he knew. The invocation to Snorri, the one Gorat had chanted when they had sacrificed the horse. The men of Hovenscar lived by their horses. For the mares to go dry was a disaster. A prudent man does not offend the gods. Therefore, Gorat had sacrificed a stallion. When Snorri refused the gift, what was more natural than to offer a boy instead? That's the end of section 3.